Janardhan Swamy, Member of Parliament, Mr. Muktesh Chandra, Alok, and friends. I'm very happy to Asim and his team for this opportunity for Data Security Council of India to come and make a presentation on global commons are a national asset. Cyberspace, where does it actually stand? We have heard a lot already, except that our domain, our area, our work space is the IT BPO companies, as well as in the domestic sector, banking, telecom, and we are trying to dabble with e-governance projects. The basic focus is on creating data protection practices which present to the world that India is a secure destination and they should continue to trust their global sourcing work into Indian companies. We are trying to grow from the current level. In fact, this year we are touching $100 billion worth of IT services, which includes about 70% of exports. So about $70 billion worth of exports. And we are trying to grow to a level of $225 billion by 2020. Now this can only be done if India is a secure destination. So the focus of DSCI as an NASSCOM on is to create best practices for security and privacy, work with the government in public advocacy, create outreach through multiple channels, and also create awareness about cyber crimes and build the capacity of police organizations, law enforcement agencies to handle cyber crimes. I'm sure you are aware that we are running 8 cyber labs in major cities, which are IT BPO cities concentration like Bangalore, Chennai, Mumbai, Pune, Gurgaon. Likewise, 8 cities we have labs where we train police officers in cyber forensics. How do you actually look at the audits? How do you analyze the logs? And how do you actually apprehend a criminal? In fact, in day before yesterday in the NILF in Mumbai, Mr. Chidambaram, Home Minister, he announced that they would expand this working relationship with DSCI as Ministry of Home Affairs with DSCI. And I'm looking towards working closely with NTR also in the months to come. So our role is going to expand a little bit in the government, not just be confined to the IT BPO. So let me start now, come back to the theme of cyberspace, whether a global commons or a national asset. Now we are all aware that cyberspace, the activities are continuing to expand, whether it is online commerce, e-governance, internet banking, social media is the new kid on the block. Everything is expanding. But then at the same time, if you look at our own numbers in India, we are now 100 million internet connectivity, more than 100 million. In fact, broadband crossing 4 to 5 million. And the users, for example, Facebook, out of the 845 million users, we have 46 million in India. And this number is growing. I mean, no matter what we say, these media are here to stay. Notwithstanding the controversies that you have seen in the last couple of months. Twitters are almost 1 billion a week today, starting from a total of 240 billion tweets 5 years ago. So this medium is here and more people are adapting to it. And any new media, social media, creating disruption, and Alok noted that social media is what is creating the security problems also. So recent cyber attacks, we all know many of these, but I like to highlight one or two only. The Citigroup hacking, IMF, Sony, Boeing, and Lockheed. Now in all these, it was intellectual property which was stolen worth billions of dollars. Numbers are put at $1 trillion for the last year. And of course, whether it is the Chinese or any others, we don't know. There are fingers which are pointing in that direction, but then there's no definitive proof. A problem of cyberspace. And Ponemon report of August 2011, it talks about losses ranging from $1.5 million to $36.5 million per year per company which is under attack. And the numbers are expanding. And terrorists are using cyberspace to organize through indoctrination, dissemination of information, creating communities, channelizing funds, and that is why you see that the governments are also trying to counter, to stop the funding, to track For example, the money trade. Our own project of NatGrid is basically trying to do that, collecting information from 21 agencies and passing it on to 10 security agencies to share that data. Crime syndicates are appearing. Financial frauds are taking, international gangs are appearing. Now this community, I'm sure this is, all of you are aware about this, but then what is cyberspace emerged as? I would like to characterize it by saying that cyberspace is today in part a town square where people engage in politics and free speech. In part it is a main street where people do shopping. And in part it is consisting of dark alleys where crime occurs. And this part is expanding. And in part it is also secret corridors where spies engage in economic and military espionage. And again, this part is expanding. And in part it is a battlefield which is going to expand in a big way, where nations may be at war, destroying adversary systems of power generation, distribution, transport, all the critical infrastructure. And this silent war is going on all the time without our knowledge. And many times the attacks are discovered several months or even several years later, while these attackers have been present for a long time. Now, given all this, is it a global commons or a national asset? So for this, I would like to take you back first, although we are all techies here, mostly as I can see. I can see very clearly that Mukesh and I are the only two overdressed persons in this audience. I didn't realize this. Next time, I will take care of that. So coming back to the definition of cyberspace. Cyberspace is comprised of computer networks, computer resources, and all the fixed and mobile devices connected to the global internet. A nation's cyberspace is part of the global cyberspace. Can we define the boundaries? Probably not. The space is borderless, unlike the physical world, where the land, sea, river, waters, air, they are all limited by geographical boundaries. So is it a global commons like sea, air and space? They are the ones which are global commons. But then there's a problem. All the networks and devices connected to them, they belong to people and or organizations in specific countries. So do these constitute private property and hence a national asset? Whereas sea, air and space, they don't belong to anybody. They are true global commons. So if it is a global commons, what international laws should apply to cyberspace? How can countries defend their part of the global cyberspace? If they are cyber attacked, do they have recourse to existing laws like the law of armed conflict, the Charter of United Nations? But if it is a national asset, how can it be defended? Because the attacks can come from anywhere, any part of the world. So if you say it's a national asset in my own country, but then attackers can come from anywhere without your knowledge. The challenge that attackers may be hard to identify. It's a further challenge. More so because there are no barriers to cyberspace entry. Since attack vectors, which are freely available at low cost, they enable non-state actors to challenge large organizations and countries by attacking them for financial frauds, terrorist or ideological reasons. So even worse scenario is a nation state using non-state actors against its adversaries for cyber espionage and disruption of critical infrastructure. Something we have seen in the case of Estonia, Georgia, and to some extent probably Iran also recently. Now these things can't be really pinpointed explicitly. Now whether cyberspace belongs to global commons, I would like to present here first on the natural global commons, how they have evolved and how their access and stability has evolved internationally. So I'd like to cover briefly the experience of creating rules of behavior in the global commons of sea, air and space, and then I'll move on to cyberspace, both as a commons and as a national asset. Now global commons, sea, air and space have long been accepted as global commons by the international community. The global commons are not under the control of a particular state, but are open for use by states, organizations and individuals worldwide, one of the definitions. They bring economic benefits to nations, facilitate the passage of goods and people, on which every nation depends. And sea is the oldest of the global commons. Over 90% of global trade is carried through the seas even today. It was viewed as a great highway or a wide common over which men may pass in all directions. Way back in 1890, when a person by the name Alfred Thayer Mahan, he did a study of the sea power of history during the period 1660 to 1783. So his analysis revealed that dominating seaborne commerce and controlling sea routes enabled a country to project its power capabilities. A state could become a military power through the control of routes. This led European thinkers recognize the potential for international conflicts in the commons, and hence the need for international agreements to broad rules and regulations, which is what today we are struggling with in the case of cyberspace. Now, in the case of sea as global commons, there was an agreement which United Nations was able to hammer out called the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS UNCLOS, in December 1970. So it defines the rules of the road, so to say, which the countries have to obey to ensure that sea is used for the benefit of all mankind. Likewise, here as global commons, it has broad agreements. IATA, ICEO, and all, they are the organizations which govern traffic or movement in here as global commons. And space is the latest till, of course, cyberspace arrived. Outer space, after the launch of the Sputnik in 1957, the countries were able to hammer out the cyberspace treaty, outer space treaty in 1967. Now, as a regulatory space, geostationary orbit, you could launch satellites, and countries were given space so that only the advanced countries may not occupy the entire geostationary orbit. So rules of the road in space were also laid down. So one can see that global commons are used for economic, commercial, and military purposes. Militaries and nations view it as a means to protect national territory and strategic interests, since navigating safely through the global commons is deemed to be part of the national defense. And this is reinforced by the US Department of Defense report of 2010, what they call as the Quadrennial Defense Review Report 2010. It states explicitly that it is in our interest that we dominate the global commons, so that there is economic stability and our national security, that is US national security. But then now you come to cyberspace as global commons. As I raised the point earlier, does it have national borders? Perhaps yes. Look at the case of China, Saudi Arabia, many other countries. They are installing filters at the gateways, trying to divide your local cyberspace, that you are not able to access some of the content or others cannot reach you. So if a country snaps connection completely at its gateways, landing stations, then it becomes an intranet. It is no longer cyberspace, not part of the cyberspace. So which means that it will not be able to derive the benefits of global connectivity. But it is a global commons because we are all connected right now, albeit of a new kind, because this cyberspace as a global commons is man-made. It facilitates the transfer of data and information rather than people, vessel, and goods. And as I said earlier, it is largely owned by the private sector. But it's a national asset too, since every entity of the infrastructure is in a particular country and owned by individuals or organizations. So it's a national asset and a part of the global cyberspace also. So if you go back again to what Obama said when he took over as president, he said that cyberspace commons is a strategic national asset, and stated that protecting this infrastructure will be a national priority, because the entire American way of life is totally dependent upon the IT infrastructure, the entire critical infrastructure and so on. However, issues of ownership, they complicate governance and require high level of public-private sector participation, because the infrastructure in the US is almost 100% owned by the private sector. In India, we also see now it is happening. Like the telecom infrastructure is owned to the extent of 70% by the private players. Power generation, power distribution, is also in the hands of the private sector. Transportation, airlines, now more than 80% of the traffic is carried by the private sector, and so on. So we are moving in that direction. So dependence is all on IT assets of critical infrastructure, and that too largely on the private sector. But the attacks on these systems, which are national assets, can come from anywhere in the world because cyberspace is borderless. So what do? If you want to protect your own infrastructure, you have to be a part of the global cyberspace and create rules of the road, just the way rules of the road have been created for sea, air, and space. So we do need global rules. Now, I would like to take you through some of the cyberspace characteristics. It's totally a techies domain, like people like you. They are at the forefront of innovation, development of new technologies, new services. Now, this has led to globalization, and I would say more and more economic impact is felt by us also. We are part of that, and our economy has grown. I'm not saying basically because of this, but to some extent that we are dependent upon globalization and cyberspace, and if we want to reap the benefits on a continued basis, we have to do so. So we do require economic growth and globalization. So we do require to be part of the cyberspace, but we need to protect it. So I will not go through again the recent cyber attacks, but the key point that sensitive country information, including defense secrets, I referred to the IPRs earlier, Lockheed and so on. These secrets are also being used. But then the point is that espionage is something which is going on for ever since the mankind was created. Our states were created. And we have read all kinds of stories, we see movies, Second World War, espionage is something which is going on and which will always be there. And espionage is not taken to be an act of war. It is something in which all states engage. But then cyberspace has emerged as a new domain, as a fifth domain in which warfare shall be conducted. Muktesh and I will refer to that briefly. So it is appearing as a fifth domain, and countries have to gear up that the next war could be a net-centric war, which means that we will not even be aware that the war is going on. And countries will be losing out on the economic secrets. And in fact, the next war is basically to cripple a country economically. You don't have to cripple the United States by attacking New York or Wall Street. You can cripple it through cyber attacks. Today, we are seeing about social media. Like Google can say that I am subject to the laws of the United States because my servers are located there. So if it is a cloud, a global cloud, then if it is hosting Indian citizens' data, it should be treated as an extension of the Indian servers. So new rules have to be created that global servers will have to comply with laws of the land wherever they are providing services to. Criminals are creating cyber weapons, exploiting vulnerabilities in various platforms, hosting them globally and making them available to all. Not just for espionage, but for attacks also on critical infrastructure. So it is a kind of a cyber warfare which is slow. And the national IT assets are attacked from cyberspace commons without the fear of being identified. So even though all the assets are owned privately, individual countries are finding it difficult to handle the criminals, since the origin of cyber attack can be camouflaged since attribution is difficult. So global cooperation is clearly required. If we don't build the rules, then it is going to be the Wild West for a long, long time. So I think I will not labor through, I have some other points also, but I'd like to conclude by saying that cyberspace is both a global commons and a national assets. To protect national assets, rules of the road are required for the cyberspace commons. So our own protection depends upon the cyberspace global commons. Because the cyberspace spans the globe seamlessly. It is a man-made global commons. Its size continues to expand as broadband is added and more applications are mediated through it. It is a global commons where each piece of the assets are owned by individuals or organizations. More and more critical infrastructures are owned and operated by the private sector. Hence, cybersecurity is intimately linked to national security. While governments are responsible for national security, cybersecurity requires active partnership of the private sector to protect national assets. So we all have a role to play. Further, attribution difficulties in tracing an attacker promote anonymity in cyberspace. And non-state actors play a significant role in cyber attacks and can work hand in hand with the nation states in cyber espionage and cyber warfare without getting identified. So governments and private sector have to work together to evolve rules of behavior. Public and private sector partnership is critical. Traditional law enforcement is inadequate because evidence may span over global servers and networks in various jurisdictions. Cyber investigations require international cooperation. Thirdly, since distinction between cyber attacks and cyber warfare is thin, there is need to define under which condition is a computer network attack an act of war. And in that case, will the law of armed conflict apply? And when does the law of armed conflict application begin? How do you decide? And then how do you decide that the war has come to an end? So will this domain be used to gain supremacy in traditional military warfare? The international community should engage at all levels, governments, private sector, to create rules of behavior in cyberspace, to protect it as a commons so that it is not used by criminals and non-state actors to launch attacks against national assets of countries. Thank you.